I'm Gerd Leonhard, Futurist. Welcome to the World by 2030. Another episode. I am talking to Anton Musgrave, my good friend and colleague from Cape Town, South Africa. We are, in fact, in Cape Town, South Africa. Lucky us.
On a beautiful day today.
Yeah, it's beautiful today, and we're talking about the future. And today we're talking about what does it mean to be a futurist, and what in the world is a futurist, and why did we choose it, if we did, and what does it actually mean? So I'll pass over to Anton. Maybe you can start with what in the world is a futurist?
Good. I sometimes wonder that myself. It's so confusing at times, at least. But in essence, the name captures the spirit of it. It's a person with a passion, I think, for understanding what lies beyond the horizon, without the ability to predict what that may be. But someone who is keenly looking for signals from the future, messages from the future, and synthesizing these signals into a story about the future that explains the opportunities and what the world might be like. And for me, personally, it's very much about helping leaders enter these tough conversations, because they very rarely do in the boardroom, given the nature of operating business of today. It's short-term focused. And the futurist needs to be really good at helping leaders lift their heads, see over the horizon, and contemplate potential outcomes out there and what they may mean for whatever it is that they're doing.
So there are lots of pieces to it. I mean, lots of moving parts to it, but I always say it's really about insights and foresights.
Correct.
And intuition. I think Jeff Bezos once said that he decides on every project and every action that he does based on data and information and all that stuff. But in the end, it's all his gut feel, right? And intuition, which was very honest. I think that really this is what humans do best. And this is why I don't think ChatGPT can make a good futurist, if it ever could actually say something about the future. But really, it's about the insights and the foresights. And I always say my job is to travel into the future, 5, 10 years, maybe longer sometimes, and then to come back with what I've seen.
Correct.
And then put it on the table and say, I'm seeing, it's the end of oil. The end of oil is coming.
Yep.
Right? You may not see that because, you're Aramco or whatever, right?
You may not want to see it.
You might not want to see that, but it's kind of like a therapist. And many times when I speak to executives or board members and CEOs and individuals, it's kind of like being a future therapist, I say that. Yeah. So I'm breaking this from the future and I'm saying, clearly, what we're seeing here, like I did in the music business, music will be on the cloud. And here we are in 1999, when I got started, and I'm saying, what in the world are you talking about? The cloud. We hate the cloud. We hate the internet.
What is the cloud?
Go away. Nobody knows what the cloud is. And today, this is what we have. So to create this foresight is based on intuition, a lot of reading, a lot of studying, a lot of these kind of things. So to me, it's very important not to confuse that with prediction.
Absolutely not. I mean, they're two very, very different things. And
right.
It's about predictions, about standing in the present, saying what sequence of events are going to happen and the outcome they're going to lead to.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely not what any self-respecting futurist should be doing.
Well, there were people that were good at it. For example, Buckminster Fuller, Arthur C. Clarke, 50 years ago. But today, I think the major problem is, I think if you're talking about prediction, is that the time frame is so crunched.
It's with the acceleration of speed of everything. Right. So in our language, we talk about how do you build memories of the future? Well, take yourself there. Just close your eyes, take yourself 10 years out and imagine, what does it mean when your 14-year-old daughter is running a listed company with her current sort of behavior as a child? Put that in a leadership role and say, what does that mean for us? And develop these memories of these futures and then come back from the future and then reassess your present. And of course, obviously, the decisions you're taking tomorrow about what you're going to do, how you're going to allocate capital, what people you're going to employ, what are your core capabilities, and so forth, to create optionality about the future. Because one thing I've also learned over 32 years is that whatever future view you hold will likely be wrong in one or more ways.
Well, I think here's the question to the audience. I think if you can't answer the question, what does 2030 look like in my life? In the world, in my company, if you don't have an answer where you have a hunch on what it looks like, then you got to go hunting, right? You got to go and say, okay, by 2030, the world is going to look like this, and according to my view, and you develop that hunch not just by watching, stuff on Netflix or Black Mirror or whatever you're watching. You develop the hunch by reading, by talking to people, by creating conversations, And when you have a hunch that something will happen, it can grow over time. It becomes a conviction.
Yes.
Right. And then you say, okay, it's quite clear to me this is what's going to happen. And then you make different decisions.
Exactly.
And I
right.
think this is the important part, is that you feel secure about your hunch. Like, I think this is the most important thing for leaders. You have to feel secure about your intuition and your hunches to act on it. And also, a company that doesn't allow people to have hunches and intuition is bound to fail now, because the speed is so vastly different.
The speed and the amplitude of the impact is so different. But what people make a big mistake around, Gerd, in my experience, is when you talk about the hunch, it sounds a bit fluffy, hocus pocus. It's not that. It's a sense, it's an intuition, it's a gut feel. But then you need to validate that en route to the destination. And so you say, these are the 4 or 5 core signals telling me that the hunch is going to be correct or has a high probability of being correct.
And that's the foresight thing. For me, it's very much like when you do online dating. I don't do much online dating, these days.
You've got to admit to it anyway.
I'm married, but I'm going to investigate it. So when you do online dating, you give it all the data about what you're looking for. But this is very explicit, height or whatever it is, right? And you can then find the perfect person that matches the profile based on, 500 data points, right? But then when you go to date, the reality is like 4 seconds, you realize it's all just not true, right? Or it's good data, but it's still not true. And I think foresights are exactly like this. You have all the data, right?
The other dimension is you go on this date and it just intuitively feels wrong. Everything may be right, it might tick all the boxes, but for you in that moment, it's wrong.
And this is kind of what's happening with data and foresight. I think I look at a lot of data, I read lots of reports and all that stuff, but I always say, if you torture data long enough, it will confess to anything. So I'm looking at this data and saying, it's totally clear, people are going to go into virtual reality and live in the metaverse. But when you look at it from a wider point of view of emotions, understanding, intuition, spirituality, consciousness, whatever, human agency, it is completely different. And I think this is where the art of intuition comes in. Steve Jobs said basically what he wants to do with Apple, rest in peace, of course, is the combination of art and technology. Right? And the art is also understanding what is coming and then translating it back into today. That's another art yet.
Yeah.
Because you may understand what's coming, but you can't explain it.
Yeah.
Right?
For me, also, I think what's really, really important, and when I think back to my days as a futurist 32 years ago, I'll never forget the first YouTube clip I embedded in a PowerPoint presentation. People said, wow. Now, of course, we've all read, way too much in a way. And everyone's got very smart advisors, MBA graduates are everywhere. So what makes the big difference today? And I think, firstly, it's being provoked by a futurist, but it's also then developing the skill to understand what I call the second and third order implications of something that's pretty obvious. If you take mobility, autonomous cars, right? Pretty jolly obvious. Pretty obvious we're going to have fewer car accidents. So what's a non-obvious second or third order implication? Well, fewer people die. But most organ transplants come from people that die. So where are we going to get hearts from to put into people that need them? Right? And then you start saying, okay, well, let's look at augmentative 3D printing. Let's look at human tissue manufacturing, etc., and say, well, we're going to 3D print hearts for people. But then you take it even a further layer and you say, all right, so if we have autonomous cars, it means I don't need to stay awake. So think about all those petrol stations en route that used to sell Coca-Cola or Red Bull to keep you awake. They're not going to sell them anymore. Why? Because I don't need to be awake.
They're going to sell chargers.
They're going to sell chargers or new music downloads or whatever it is for what you do in your car.
It's interesting. I think the non-obvious thing is what humans are good at, as opposed to computers. For example, I did ask ChatGPT, the new AI that we're looking at right now, about certain jobs that I was doing, like what is the future of tourism and sustainability. And it was giving me good input. That was very much fact-based. Right? But I can take that and say, okay, I see that it was already on my radar, but I can amplify it and then also look behind this. Yeah?
Now you overlay it. Exactly.
Right? So you're looking at this kind of Maslow pyramid for skills. On the lower part of that pyramid is data, information, and simple knowledge. Machines can have that.
Correct.
Right? So you can ask the AI for data, information, and knowledge, even though that's also wrong many times, but it can cover the lower part of the routine. Yeah? But there's 5 layers on top, which is tacit knowledge, quiet knowledge, understanding, which is complex, emotional, things, right? And then basically intuition, imagination, consciousness, agency. That's all on top of the pyramid.
Absolutely.
And this is really what you need people for. And that's why I think as a futurist, I strive to work on that level, not by blinding people with lots of information and flashy stuff, even though I like flashy stuff. But on top of that, basically, well, I wouldn't call it wisdom, but really this is ultimately the key of, like, when you listen to a really brilliant person like Bill Gates, or Deepak Chopra or Dalai Lama, or not to put them in the class,
in the same category.
Right? But you're saying, wow, that's just so profoundly true, and this is what I want to get to.
But you know what also is manifest about those profoundly true moments is that I always say, like you do, wow. But then 30 seconds later, I say, you idiot, why didn't you think of that? Because it's not rocket science. I mean, as smart as they are, what they're saying actually boils down to simple time to reflect. And if we all gave ourselves that time to reflect, we'd probably come up with a lot of those things.
I use the symbols that I found somewhere from this old radar station in World War I or II, where basically the soldiers are wearing this giant artificial ears.
Yes, that's right.
And this funnel ears. And with that, they can hear the airplane coming. In fact, they had ears that were like, 20
big
feet.
domes.
With tubes going into ears, and there are guys listening like this, because they can hear the airplane coming. And this is kind of what we do, And then we say, yeah, I hear something coming. And, it's funny, it's not just the smart and bright people who hear stuff coming. Sometimes, once I met a taxi driver in Brazil, and we were talking about stuff, and I mentioned to him that I was talking about the future, right? And then he says to me, he points outside as we're driving. He says, "This is real life. It's not in here."
Yeah,
says,
and he points to his cell
points
phone.
to the mobile phone. I'm like, shit, yeah, that's true. It's like profoundly true that real life is not in the box. It's not on the screen. It's out there. And then
my favorite example of that is when I say to an executive team, you pay a big four consultancy millions of dollars to define the customer of the future, and they all nod. And I say, tell me, when last did you have a conversation with your kids around the dinner table? But then go to your colleagues the next morning and say, just let me share with you what my daughter and my son said last night. They're only 7, by the way. But let's just debate what this means for the future of our business.
Yeah, to have the openness and to understand.
Exactly.
Right?
And you get this nervous giggle in the room because they realize that the signals from the future don't have to come from just a futurist or an article or Bill Gates. They're around us.
And the other thing is that they shouldn't be just intellectual. This
Absolutely.
is another one of those really interesting things when you do speeches or when you talk to clients, is they tend to intellectualize, they want proof, with facts and statistics, but intellectualize things really doesn't move the needle in the end. When you're pitching somebody for an investment or when you're talking to your team, it's all going to be about the things are not so much intellectual, but on a different level, on an inside level. And
well, you need to bring it back to a real business impact. If it's a business client, it's a business engagement, it's all very well having the epiphany about the future. But we need to connect that, whether it's an insight or something exciting at an emotional level, but bring that back to the reality of what that means today and how we can create it. And that's how you bridge that gap, because I think Wall Street's got a lot to answer for. The way it's forced executives to think in 3 to 4 month cycles about everything is crazy. And that's what we do, is take people out into the future, get them excited, get the goosebumps about the art of the possible, but then have a way of intelligently connecting that back to, so what does it mean and how can I change things tomorrow that will create that optionality for me, no matter what the future is.
Very good point. We cut here. Thanks very much. I'm Gerd Leonhard, and this is Anton Musgrave from we're in beautiful Cape Town, South Africa.